Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today to discuss disaster recovery. As your Azure experts in the CPA industry, we're going to be talking about ASR or Azure Site Recovery. I'm Kate Krupe. I lead the accounting vertical here at Netgain, and I'm here with my colleague and partner in crime, Bill Sorensen. We normally sit in two different states and cities, but today I'm visiting our Minneapolis office, and I'm here in Bill's office. So we both look like Bill Sorensen today. Bill?
Thanks, everyone. This is a great topic. My background is really being involved in the accounting industry for the last 15, 20 years and involved in cloud computing or running things in the cloud for most of my career. I started out as an accountant, realized I couldn't handle the monthly accounting cycle, so I appreciate everybody else who does that, and then moved over to technology early in my career. Been at Netgain about 6 years and really focus on product and professional services, and I'm one of the Azure experts here.
And I'll say that Bill and I have worked hand in hand over the past several years in working on designing Azure solutions for the CPA industry, and we talk about DR all the time.
Yeah, and it's typically disaster recovery is a dry topic, but today it's not going to be, and things have changed over the last 5 to 10 years to make it a viable solution for firms at every size, and so we're excited about this.
All right, let's kick us off. You want to do a little who we are?
Yeah, so Netgain was founded in 2000, based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and really specializes in that cloud computing services, focusing on Microsoft Azure and the accounting industry. We work to simplify technology, enabling organizations to really accelerate their transformation. We focus on enhancing security, developing that resiliency, and then finally making sure that end user experience is stellar. That's what we do at Netgain. We serve mid-market accounting firms and specialize again in Azure. So that's who Netgain is. That's about the only commercial you're going to get today.
All right. So just to walk through what we're going to talk about in our fairly short webinar here, we're going to talk about Azure Site Recovery and sort of what that is. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive between backups and DR because we use them both. They overlap each other in some cases. So we're going to dig into that a little bit with each other. And then why disaster recovery? What is the business purpose for it? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the details for anybody who's looking into ASR and looking into implementing it. Some of the details about that, some details about testing, which is just so important when it comes to having backup and DR solutions. And then we're going to talk about our services and how we serve our clients. And we'll finish up with some best practices and key takeaways for you. And we will try and save a few minutes, which we're not always successful with, for your questions.
And if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll either get to them as part of the webinar or we'll answer them later. So let's jump in. So Azure Site Recovery is really Microsoft's Azure disaster recovery solution. They've built it so that it's a straightforward solution to really replicate your environment to another region. You can replicate just specific portions of your environment, so maybe core applications. They've got really, really strong recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. Those are two things that get talked about a lot, and really measure the service level that disaster recovery solution brings. The other piece is ASR is geographically dispersed. So the goal is, obviously, if there's a disaster in the area where you're hosted, you want to be able to come up separate from that. And typically it's 300 to 500 miles away. It's cost effective and testable. I think the piece here I want to bring up and talk about with you, Kate, is even if we go back to when you were CIO at the firm you worked at, disaster recovery wasn't a simple solution. It was complicated and expensive.
Very expensive. I remember, I think it is the one thing I could never get in my budget bill. It was in the six figures for a firm our size, and we were a mid-sized firm. It was fraught with complication. We looked at doing it ourselves and I was using a NetApp at the time, and we were looking at putting a second NetApp at one of our sort of remote locations that we had. But just keeping all of that up to date, keeping the licensing, keeping all the firmware up to date, making sure everything was ready should you need to fail over to it, was very expensive. And then there were cloud solutions. There was VMware got into it, Veeam got into it. There were a number of different providers who got into helping with this. But at the time then, it was also just incredibly expensive to use those solutions.
Yeah, and your point about your firm, and it was a significantly sized firm, wouldn't do this. So even if you were a $30 or $50 million firm, it felt too expensive to invest in this disaster recovery solution, should it be needed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But those days are so gone now. With Azure Site Recovery, even if you've got workloads in a data center, maybe you're still in the private data center and you need the disaster recovery solution, ASR works great for that as well. So it's both for Azure to Azure as well as your data center to Azure.
And I'll tell you something that we have here on the slide. This second bullet point I think is interesting. When you're looking at DR, there are a lot of pieces to it, and there's a whole business continuity piece that goes alongside it to make sure you can implement it as a firm and actually be functional and not have downtime or lose billable hours. As you step into it with ASR, you can not only work with your entire environment, but if that's not where you are, if you're not ready to bite that off yet, you can choose specific applications. So you might use ASR just for critical applications.
Right, exactly.
Just at least to start with, depending on what the rest of your plan is.
Yeah, and with the blend of applications that we have today, whether it's Wolters Kluwer or Thomson or Caseware, there are times where you're going to want at least those handful of core applications available, the whole time. Well, let's take a look at if we can't get there, where have we been today? And that's really this idea that backup is where a lot of firms are, and what's the difference between backup and disaster recovery?
So our backups, which we've been doing forever, really are point-in-time recovery. So we use these most frequently for file and folder restores. You may use it for a VM, a virtual machine restore, or you could have a situation where your SQL server became corrupt. So you're going to go to backup and bring back just the SQL server. So that's really what backups are meant for and are best at. And then also being able to go back in time. If you are in a new audit cycle and you had, data files for your client corrupted sometime last year, being able to go back a year and get that from backup that's the right use of backup.
Yeah.
You can, and people have recovered from disaster through backup, but that is a long and painful process.
Yeah, it really is. And it's not meant for that. So in the situations where you don't have a disaster recovery solution in place, recovering from backup, whatever the reason, that can be days, that can be significant. You may have to buy equipment in situations. And so it's really important to understand that that's not your protection against a disaster. So if we look at the disaster recovery side, you want a solution that's automated. You want something that's got an orchestration to it so that you push the button. No doubt there's things to do, but you want it to be able to fail over, start up the new world, prep it, and ultimately be able to have your staff log in fairly quickly. You want this idea of near synchronous replication, and that's that recovery point objective, RPO, we talk about. And so you want that close to now. So if you're working, you just saved that binder, you want that replicated now. You don't want it replicated tomorrow. And so it's important to see those solutions. You want it testable as well. We talked a little bit about the geographic redundancy. But when I think about testability, I remember, even 10 years ago, we all hated that annual disaster recovery test that we had to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, you plan for it for maybe a few weeks, you schedule the day, you run the test. Quite honestly, not that many tests were successful, but it was part of that process. And today's DR solutions really meet the compliance needs as well.
So the why, what are the business reasons here? What kind of disasters can happen that really require, and this was one of the difficult selling points to my firm, was what could happen that there's a potential for that's big enough, that's worth the cost, and then figuring out what the downtime might be and being able to calculate what that is in a loss of revenue. But here we're going to talk about what are the main reasons why people leverage a DR solution.
Yeah, and in today's world, one of the obvious ones is ransomware, right? You get a ransomware attack, you want to be able to recover from that in a short amount of time. You want to be able to have people back and working quickly with a limited amount of time risk. The next one I want to touch base on, and we usually handle this differently, but really it's a bad application update. And if you see on the graph on the right, this can happen significantly often. 56% of the time is related to these bad updates. And so you could think about it as there was a large engagement update that failed for whatever reason. You're going to spend a certain amount of time trying to fix it. You're thinking about, do I restore from last night? And in a case where you've got disaster recovery, you can literally hit the button and have the organization up and running within an hour to the way it was just before the update.
Now, to foreshadow a slide coming up, let me just say that one of the things about using DR this way is it's important to know what your firm is going to declare a disaster and how and when you're going to employ this. And that's sort of part of your business continuity planning, but it's really key. If you're going to get the most out of DR, you need to all agree on when do you pull that trigger.
Yeah, exactly. And the other items on the slide are the obvious ones.
I don't know though about fire or explosion. 26%. What is happening out there? How many explosions are going on?
Well, I think in data centers of all different sizes, it's got to be fire, right? It can't be
true.
Anyway, so let's look at just a story related to disaster recovery. So I'll read this first piece and Kate can do the second slide. So it starts out normal day, and you log in and you notice, hey, things are a little slow. You're kind of surprised by that. Other people are commenting on, gee, your environment's a little slow today. You do have a IT security group, and they start getting calls about, just applications aren't opening or they're taking longer to open. So they start looking at it and they see some security logs that are new, and again, more calls come in. Maybe the remote users can no longer log in, and then somebody gets that first ransomware notice. So this would be that point in time where your disaster committee would immediately meet with the firm leadership, typically talk about this and work toward, what do we do now? And so as we roll that forward in a situation where you do have Azure Site Recovery. Wrong button. Sorry about that.
So you do have disaster recovery. Now you can escalate to the right group. And who is the right group? That's something that, again, you would have determined ahead of time to call it a disaster. Keep that group small, whatever it's going to be. When you have these disasters, you have to be able to make decisions and act very quickly. And then your Azure Site Recovery is orchestrated, or I'm sorry, you're reviewing it and you're looking at your recovery point in time. And then you've got your recovery run book, which is, yeah, go ahead.
I think the key piece here is, so ransomware happened at some point. Let's say it happened early in the morning or overnight. Now, you don't want to fail over to right now because there's still ransomware. So you can look and see in a period of time, how long has that ransomware been there? And in this example, let's say it came in overnight. Your technical team determines that at 8 p.m. yesterday, everything was clear. With Azure Site Recovery, you're able to choose that point in time to recover to, make that selection and start the recovery. So a dramatic impact is you can miss all the mess in your new world while that new world comes up and spins up and it's all clear and clean. Now, in your production environment, you're going to look and identify, why did we get that ransomware? How did they get in? Maybe it was a compromised account. So in your new world, you're going to disable that account right away.
Right.
But your firm's up and running, the ransomware is taken care of, and Azure Site Recovery, provided that solution. So the idea is there's a happy ending in those situations.
All right, so we're looking at ASR details here, and we're talking again a little bit about what are the different parameters that we want to be familiar with when we're setting up ASR, including your RPO and your RTO. So what is your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective? It also is including that plan, so you know who's going to do what when, and what are you all going to determine is a disaster. Now, when we start talking about how fast this can happen now, it's really, really quick. So when we were looking at this back in the day, we were making those, that was a big part of the process and planning was, how are we going to figure out what that RPO and RTO is? Now, because this is all so automated, you really are going to choose the best possible option.
Right, exactly. And back in the day, you'd say our recovery time objective, how long does it take? You're going to say 8 hours. It's going to be 8 hours. We're going to be down for 8 hours. That's the whole team working for 8 hours, getting it back up, getting the first users in, getting started. In today's world, while we do these tests, we see that happening sub-hour. So you run the test, start to fail over. We'll talk about testing in the next slide, but just on that timing, it happens so quick to be able to get the environment up running and available so that your users can immediately log in. It's just been a fantastic change.
So it's really more here determining, like you were saying before, what point you want to recover based on what the disaster was and what you're trying to avoid moving forward. And that's really happening real time, but you don't have that planning of figuring out how much do I want to invest to be able to get up in 4 hours versus 8 hours versus 2 days. That's sort of all been taken away. And now this is all happening very, very quickly.
Yeah, and that investment historically has been, if you wanted it in a shorter amount of time, I want to recover in an hour. That was a lot more expensive than I'm okay with a day of downtime. Now in today's environment, as Kate just said, those have really become the same. And when we look at the cost of this, instead of 100% of what your IT spend would be to replicate everything, we're down to right around 15% of your Azure spend. So it's really, really low.
And the reason for that, and I don't think we go over, I don't think I'm stealing something from
No,
a future
no.
slide, but the reason for that, Bill, is that the way that we design it it's not a full spend of your Azure bill.
That's correct. So Azure Site Recovery has a license portion and then a storage portion. Microsoft, if you think about Azure, is this almost unlimited amount of resources at your fingertips. And so when you need a new server, you instantly get that. So in the disaster recovery scenario, you're really replicating all of the storage to this other location. And then when you need to spin up those servers, it's like you've got this unlimited volume of servers to choose from, automatically configured, and they start instantly. Again, it's just the storage you're spending money on here. And we've got some optimization ways to keep that storage cost down as well.
And we talk about the scalability and sort of elasticity of the public cloud. And this is just a perfect example of that.
Yeah, this is fantastic. You pay for what you use. Most of the time, you're using a little bit. In a true disaster, that gets spun up. You're going to spend money on that new environment, but typically, or in some cases, where the old environment has a problem, that's going to come down instantly. And so you're not double spending there.
Right.
So let's talk a little more about this testing. And, Kate, your group has led, well, a tremendous number of these Azure Site Recovery tests. I think it's good to kind of get your perspective on, both from our side, but also from the client side. What do they see?
Right. So, what I think most of our clients are ready to walk into is a lot of planning, a lot of downtime during like the testing phase and the coordination of everything. I've had to talk clients off the ledge a few times who were just ready for the past. They were ready for the pain that they've been through before in these exercises. And it is just so much simpler than that. We do our recovery testing during the day. It doesn't interfere with production. So that gives everyone a lot of relief not to have to worry about that. And it is really quick. So we do the whole test very quickly. Really, the longest time it takes is depending on how many users you want to go in and test the applications and make sure everything works and your integrations work. But from a technology standpoint, we can do these very quickly. And there's just a lot of automation built into this that makes it very consistent. As we do them, when we first implement ASR, we implement it and then we do a test right away. And we learn from that test any little tweaking, anything about the network, anything that didn't come up exactly right. And then we can go back and rebuild that, fix it, test it again. It all happens so quickly. That level of quality that you would never be able to get to if you were doing these things over the span of 8 hours or 2 days. You just wouldn't be able to do them enough.
Well, and the cost of just historically, the cost of having double environments was just so much money. Nobody did these, right? I mean, to your point earlier, your firm, large firm, wasn't going to spend the money on this. And today, with threat actors really increasing, with AI now running a tremendous number of these significant attacks, we're seeing more and more that this is just a normal part of what every firm needs to have.
Yeah, that's we were talking earlier about the why. Why would we use disaster recovery, and ransomware is right up there at the top. The threats have just become so real. I don't run into people who haven't had some experience with ransomware somewhere along the line. And it's the use case has definitely grown for why we need this and the things that can go wrong and how long. When you talk about ransomware, it's not just about a system that became corrupt that you have to go fix or reinstall and bring the data back. You're talking about something you don't have any control over. If the threat actors have your data in a way that we can't use it. So the use case is just, in that one use case alone, has really grown. And then of course we talk about ransomware, but there's a whole universe of threat actors out there and things that are going on that we need to protect ourselves against.
Probably the other piece, just as a reminder, we've all got cybersecurity insurance now, and many of the insurance requirements, as well as now that some of the new SEC requirements we're seeing within the industry are requiring significant disaster recovery plans. And so this really, really helps that.
Yeah, we've definitely worked with our clients on their cyber insurance and making sure that they've got all of this buttoned up for that.
So let's talk about how we deliver this. So this is a key service that Netgain provides. We really meet with the firm, work through those objectives, help develop that disaster decision-making process, as well as then deploy Azure Site Recovery, deliver that initial test, make sure that the test plan is done so that confirmation of the test happens. And it's just interesting to watch, even I'm watching a little bit from the sideline, is as these tests happen, the faces of the firms who are involved is just amazing at the end of that. Typically it's a 1 hour test. They're shocked, they're amazed, the box is checked, they've got confirmation. If they wanted it recorded, it's recorded. It's just been fantastic to see that. So then we're continually monitoring that, updating it for any resource changes, reporting on it, and then really squeezing that cost down significantly low. That's one thing that Netgain's really good on is cost optimization.
It is. I mean, really the other point I was going to make about this, Bill, is that we have the opportunity to do this more at scale in that we have a lot of clients and we're able to help a lot of clients. So when we're working with our clients on setting this up and running the tests, there's a lot of knowledge share we can give in the process, and including a lot of what we know about optimizing for performance and optimizing for cost, which again is what we do every day. Right?
Yeah, and I think the other piece is we get the takeaways, and hey, we're on time, so I'm excited about that. Sometimes we just talk a lot, you know, but it really makes this affordable. It's an affordable, real solution that's testable. That's about all you could imagine you'd ever want out of a disaster recovery solution.
Agreed. And we didn't, just as one more time, just to hit, you don't have to be in Azure to use ASR.
Correct. You can have a data center and have it replicated into ASR and still get that same experience. And some of our clients are that way too. So when we look at this last slide, it's really these kind of best practices and takeaways. And you can glance through them, but it makes me think, I'm not going to read them, but it makes me think that, you know, it's a perfect time to just take 30 minutes, look at what your current disaster recovery plan is. How realistic is it? Has it been tested? When's the last time it's been tested? And then look at those test results or get one scheduled. And it's a chance for the business side and the IT side really to come together in a positive way and not kind of be at edge with each other. And historically on the disaster recovery side, I think that's been a tough thing.
I mean, we fight a lot of fires in IT. It's nice to be able to work with our leadership on strategic initiatives that protect the firm.
Exactly. Hey, it looks like one question came in. Do you sell ASR services by itself? We actually do. We've got a number of firms where we're running and managing their Azure Site Recovery. Most all of them are from private data center to Azure at this point. Typically, if someone's in Azure with us, they're a client of ours, or we're managing that environment as well.
Well, we will get these slides out to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your interest in Azure. And what's our note here?
Our next presentation is August 29th. maximize your Azure budget, join the 6% who have fully optimized their spend. So if you're not part of that 6%, or if you've got a question of is that you or not, grab your CFO and sign up and come find out how to get there.
We're trying to promote fear of missing out.
That's
A little
right.
FOMO.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.